Welcome to Insider Career Conversations, the podcast that dives deep into the world of unconventional professions. I'm your host, Sylvia Juarez. I'm here to guide you through the maze of unique career paths that often go unnoticed. Each season, we explore a different realm of career possibilities. This season, it's AI. With AI rapidly reshaping industries and becoming a central topic of global discourse, it's clear that it's not just the future, it's the present. So whether you're an AI enthusiast, a curious listener, or someone pondering a career pivot, enjoy today's episode. With AI rapidly reshaping industries and becoming a central topic of global discourse, it's clear that it's not just the future, it's the present. So whether you're an AI enthusiast, a curious listener, or someone pondering a career pivot, welcome to our AI series. Throughout the season, my co-hosts and I will invite AI experts from different industries and career paths to shed more light in the realm of possibilities that exist for AI-interested students and professionals. Hi, Tyler. How are you doing today?
Hi, Sylvia. So lovely to be here with you as always. Excited to chat a little bit more today about AI and how AI appears from a career perspective in academia, as well as how AI gets applied to the field of robotics. And what I'm doing here is hinting quite a bit at our prime guest today. I am so excited to welcome to the podcast Emily Sheetz. For a little bit of background, Emily is a current 6-year PhD candidate in the Computer Science and Engineering Department at Michigan, or the University of Michigan, where she conducts research at the intersection of AI and robotics. She's also a phenomenal mentor working with me at Veritas AI, where she worked with students both one-on-one and has previously served as our inaugural mentor for our AI junior program for young middle schoolers, which is just so exciting, getting kids into AI at a younger age. So exciting to have you join us, Emily. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Tyler. And hi, Sylvia. Thank you both so much for having me here today. So as Tyler said, what I do every day is just applying artificial intelligence, applying AI to robotics. So when I think about AI, what I'm really thinking about is how do we get an artificially intelligent agent to make decisions and then take action in the real world. And so I think a lot of times we tend to think about AI as programs or bits of code sort of trapped in our computers, but I love applying this to robotics because it makes that decision-making and action so much more real. The other thing that is really important to me when I think about artificial intelligence and how it applies to robotics is this idea that what makes someone or something intelligent is so dependent on our own physical embodiment. So what's intelligent for one person and the way they move and interact with the world is different for what makes another person intelligent. But that's even more so true for robots, because robots move and interact with the world in very different ways. And even one robot to another, their physical embodiment, so significantly affect what it is that we count as intelligence for that robot. What I think about is how do we take common tasks like using a tool to solve some problem and get these very different agents to solve that same problem in whatever way is going to make the most sense for them based on their physical embodiments.
I really love how you've broken down all the pieces of that when it comes to not only the robotics component of it, but your background when it comes to engineering. So I'm going to take it back a little bit because I'm fascinated by the fact that you're working with middle school kids. Often I work with students that started with early interest and demonstrated interest in engineering when it came to robotics. So now, as you're in the highest level of your education, a PhD, which congratulations, super interested to hear about where that's going to take you, because I hear that you're going to have a cool career after your time in academia. But can you tell us a little bit about where the intersection between robotics and artificial intelligence happens? And most of the students that I work with as a background are taking robotics to be able to demonstrate their interest in engineering. Can you make it a little bit more clear as to how you're taking it into artificial intelligence?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great question, and a question I always really like students to kind of consider and understand themselves as they think about, what it might look like for them to have careers in robotics. So I think robotics is really exciting because it is truly such an interdisciplinary field. So I know people who are coming from physics backgrounds or mechanical and civil engineering backgrounds or pure math and statistics backgrounds. And really, we need all of it. We need all that experience and more in this field of robotics. So, I think on the engineering side, the way I see people getting into robotics is more in terms of the hardware. So mechanically, how does this robot move? What parts go into it? But what I'm personally most interested in, coming at this from the perspective of AI being applied to robotics, is more the software side. So we have this physical robot, we can start it up, we can maybe get it to do a few things. How do we now get it thinking about the world, like perceiving things it's seeing around in the environment, understanding what that means, making a decision, and then carrying out that decision? So I think the AI part of robotics is very much more on like the software side. I tend to think a lot about algorithms, but it's still super important to make sure any algorithm, any software I work has to work on that hardware. I can't say that anything I do works until I see it physically move on that robot. And I know the robot has actually used my stuff, my work, to achieve some sort of task.
Well, in the sense that most of our conversations or ideas are that this type of work is kind of taking over the human aspect. I like how you're applying it to the robotic aspect, because we don't discuss enough in artificial intelligence the fact that it's really being used as an application, not necessarily as a taking over, like in some movies. It's fascinating how you're explaining it, at least here, because I'm putting that bridge together. So can you define artificial intelligence and what it means to you? We've had other guests define it. So considering that you work with robots, how do you define artificial intelligence?
Yeah. So the way I define artificial intelligence is when we can make an agent make some decision based information it has about the world, and then physically carry out some action in the real world based on that decision. So my definition of AI, as I mentioned, is very closely tied into physical embodiment of the agent making that decision, because that's going to affect how that agent thinks about what is the action I need to take, and then how do I physically perform that action in the real world.
I think what's really interesting about that point, Emily, is that your definition of AI is very embedded in your field, right? And I think it's really interesting because you talked earlier about this idea of embodiment, like the way I define intelligence and what my body can achieve is different from what another person. And then we therefore project that as different robots embodying different intelligence. Something that I think is a really cool thing to think about. Going back to Sylvia's question earlier is how you think this kind of intersection, AI and robotics, projects on your future interests career-wise, how it might manifest for other students who want to see or pursue a longer-term career in robotics and maybe even robotics AI. So I'd love to know from you, like, what you're thinking about doing post this stage of academia, and also kind of more broadly, because being in academia, you're kind of at the cutting edge of research. I'd love to know also how you see the field unfolding moving forward for other kids who might be thinking about these opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the reasons I love robotics so much is because in a lot of ways, we think about intelligence relative to ourselves as human beings. And our brains, our physical bodies have evolved to be really good at certain things. So things like language or using tools, they come really naturally to us as human beings. But in a lot of ways, robots are just these blank slates. They don't have any of that knowledge that we have baked into our brains. Mm-hmm. And so everything that might seem simple to us as human beings, it's so much more difficult for a robot because we're starting from nothing. Mm-hmm. So in terms of students who are interested in robotics, there's truly so much you can contribute here. We have these blank slates, these little mechanical agents that we're trying to get to do different things. We need them to be able to perceive the world around them in different ways. So making sense of what they're seeing or what they're hearing. We need them to think about, how do you even make sense of that information once you have it? Like, what does that tell you about the world? How do you use that to make a decision and then physically, move its body to carry out some action? So in terms of students in general, there's genuinely so much you can do and contribute. The place where I'm the most interested in is more like the physical action, the manipulation part of it. So one of my favorite projects I've been working on and off over the course of many years, and it's sort of evolved with my own educational career, is this idea that human beings use tools all the time in our day-to-day life to complete different tasks. But as I mentioned, for us, it seems really easy. It just comes naturally. We don't even have to think about it. For a robot, that is an incredibly complex task. So for robots, they not only have to perceive an object and understand, how to interact with it, they then have to physically grab it. They have to hold on to it, know how to use that tool. My favorite example is if you think about using a screwdriver. It's one thing to physically grab that screwdriver, but it's another thing to then understand, okay, this is how I turn it and this is how I apply force. And then when you're using a tool, you're not just acting on one object, you're using that object to then act on something else. So in that screwdriver example, it's not enough to operate a screwdriver. You have to use that screwdriver to act on a screw to carry something else out. And so you get this really interesting chain of reasoning. And I just find this so fascinating. It's like, how do we get the robot to think about that direct object or that tool, and then use that tool to act on something else, that indirect object, and have these effects in the world? So personally, object manipulation is what really gets me out of bed every morning. I love this idea of how we get something that's so natural to us, but requires so much intelligence for a robot. How do we get those robots to actually carry out those tasks?
Your passion really is coming across, and that you're just the fact that you can use the word manipulation in such an enthusiastic way. I'm here for it. I really am. So can I ask a question? What piqued your interest in engineering? What piqued your interest down this thread? Were you a young, curious Emily in the 6th grade and found yourself doing something? Or was it just kind of like you just went to undergrad and kind of started your way down that path?
Yeah. So for me, I did actually happen to have like a very specific moment when I first started thinking about all of this. So when I was in high school, I went with a friend to a science museum, and they had this robotics exhibit. And it was just meant to show off all the different things robots can do. So they had robots that would, climb trees. They were able to make these little vertical climbs. They had robots with 6 or more legs that could mate and balance over this really uneven terrain. But my favorite robot was this one that had this kind of goofy, cartoony face. And you could walk past it and make a face, and the robot would try to mimic your expression. And so people were, smiling or frowning or making angry faces. And it was finally my turn. I was so excited. And I made this like open mouth, like wide-eyed, shocked expression. And this robot, its jaw dropped and its eyes literally physically like popped out of its head. And I laughed so hard. And this was the most amazing thing I had ever seen, that there was this little like mechanical thing, this little mechanical being.
Right?
Be so aggressive. Yeah, it looked like a cartoon character, like something straight out of a movie. But it was so expressive, and that had such an impact on me. And I remember leaving that day thinking like, wow, like not only do we have these little mechanical agents that we can make them intelligent, we can make them make these facial expressions, but I just remember being so struck by the fact that it got me thinking about my own intelligence. And I think that's one of the things that brings me back to, my passion for AI over and over again, is that it's not just about asking questions about, what makes an agent. It's like we're holding up a mirror to ourselves and we're saying, what does it mean for me to be intelligent? Like, what does it mean for us as human beings to make decisions and take them in the real world? And now how do we break that down and impart it into something else, these little mechanical agents that have nothing to go off of? How do we get them moving in the world also?
I appreciate the story about you going to a museum, something so people would think uneventful, in the sense that it's just another day going to some, field trip or whatever the case may be. Now you're here in a PhD program, you're doing research that's taking us into the next generation of what artificial intelligence will be for those of us that are not in the academia aspect of it, but more the social and public world of it. What are your next steps in terms of professionally? Are you preparing to be part of an organization? Is it so exclusive, that artificial intelligence that you're connecting robotics to, that it's only done in one space?
No. So I think artificial intelligence connected to robotics, it has roles in so many spaces. So I have been really fortunate enough to be able to seek out opportunities in a lot of different fields. So I've actually worked with government agencies, small businesses. I've done research at big universities, small universities. And you might not think it, but there genuinely is a place for artificial intelligence and robotics at every single one of those places. And I've been really fortunate to have all of those experiences because I think you get to see just how much, we need robots as tools to help us out in so many different areas. We need robots on assembly lines. We can send robots on the International Space Station to help astronauts with repairs. There's genuinely a place for robotics, I think, in so many different places. And it's such a powerful tool for us to have, at our disposal. For me personally, I have really enjoyed my time in academia. Right now, my goal post-graduation is to get more into applied research and think more about what impact can I have with robotics. So, my dream job would be to work with one of the robotics teams at specifically NASA Johnson Space Center, just because I think that would be amazing to get to work on a robot that makes our lives easier, not just here on Earth, but out in space.
Oh my God, Emily, I don't know if we've ever gabbed together about my astrophysics background. I did research previously at the intersection of AI and stellar astronomy, and I've recently realized I'm so much more passionate about the education space, hence why I've been kind of just like gabbing constantly about Veritas AI and publication and education, but I didn't know that you had that kind of path in mind or as a dream, so it's so exciting to hear about.
I didn't know that about you either. I am going to have 1,000 questions for you afterward. I want to hear all of it.
And I'm excited that both of you are talking about this online with others present and hearing it, because I think often we have these private passions and we don't necessarily share them enough, or they're not as part of our visual, if you will, when we're presenting ourselves. And I think that this is important, not only because we're talking about something that's so remote like artificial intelligence, but also you should have a passion when it comes to your career. It should be something that really speaks to you and calls to you, so that you don't show up at a job every day. You're showing up and doing something exciting for yourself every day. And that's important. I think my next question to you, Emily, is in terms of mentoring, what have been some of the things that have been successful lessons that students can use as you've been mentoring them across? I know that you and Tyler have a very specific relationship when it comes to mentoring, but what have been some of the successes that you've seen as tools?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I love, getting the opportunity to mentor younger students has been so eye-opening for me, in terms of I'm suddenly in a position where I have people looking to me and I sort of need to impart wisdom as much as I can. So there's always 2 bits of advice that I love to give that I think have been really impactful for my students. And the students that I see be the most successful are the ones that take this to heart and really embody this. So my 2 pieces of advice are always to never be afraid to ask for help, as scary as it can be, and to just be resilient. In terms of asking for help, that is something I have to ask. I have to remind myself of that literally every day. It's so scary and so vulnerable to ask for help. But when I look back on my own career and my own educational journey so far, the times I've struggled the most were the times I was so afraid, or I didn't know even how to ask for help. And so I struggled alone with those things. But the times when I was the most successful and I was the happiest were when I told myself, I can't be afraid. And I was in an environment, and thankfully in a team, where asking questions was valued and rewarded. And so I always tell people, you can't be afraid to ask for help, as hard as it is. It will always be the bravest thing you can do. And if you find people who are smarter than you and who know more than you, and you latch on and you ask them every single question you can think to ask, that is how you're going to make progress and get to where you want to be. My next point then, I always think of this, I like phrasing this in terms of robotics, because I think a lot of times we get this idea of AI and robots as being really advanced and sometimes even scary. I have people ask me all the time if robots are going to take over the world. And I always tell them, no, we're not. They will not do that. But even if they could, we're not anywhere close to that. That is not on the horizon. But what I always like to remind people is, what was impressive in AI and robotics 50 years ago is so mundane now. And what we're doing now that's exciting to us today is going to seem so simple even in just a couple of years. And so I always like to tell people, you have to be resilient. Do this with AI and robotics all the time. Things are changing and growing, and what seems hard now is going to seem easy tomorrow. And so you just have to be resilient. It's just part of the process of growing and learning. And those are the two things I always hope my students take from any project. No matter how frustrating it is, you need to ask questions and be resilient in the face of challenges.
Yeah. And with research becoming such a big thing that high schoolers are doing, not just in AI, not just in robotics, but across spaces, I think that idea of seeking mentorship and of being resilient are just universally true for students across fields. Like finding mentors who have that kind of brilliance, who you can ask questions and grow from, is so important regardless of where you're working in. I think also what's really cool here is the resilience piece is so true across all research. Like research, just knocking things around in your head, having a couple meetings with mentors once a week to gain knowledge from them. You have to truly be like committed and passionate. So I wonder if that's also like one extra lesson here of how important it is to have a passion for these things that you are driving towards. Because otherwise you might not want to be resilient. You might not want to go find those mentors. So I think that's important too.
Yeah, I think I love the way you phrase that, Tyler. I think passion is so very important. And that's always something I think sometimes when I talk about artificial intelligence and robotics, I worry that people think it's just very technical and it's, I don't know, maybe even dry or confusing. And what I always want people to know is, no, this is fun. This is exciting. Like this field, it brings out people's passion. So I attribute this very much to sort of like my background. So I did my undergraduate degree at this small liberal arts college, Monmouth College in Monmouth, Illinois. And coming from this small liberal arts college, all of my professors instilled in me this idea that things are interdisciplinary and you want different perspectives. And you need to collaborate. And I remember two of my professors in particular had this profound impact on me because they were not only some of the smartest people I have ever met and could tell you calculus, computer science, algorithms, they could talk all day long, but they had these passions. So one of them was really into music, one of them was really into photography, and that passion and like wonder just seeped into everything they did. And I remember there'd be so many times when we'd be working on something technical and it was like we could appreciate this wonder and almost like beauty in some of the things we did. And that's something I carry with me all the time. And I always try to remind myself of is like, as technical as things may be, as dry or frustrating as they may be, there's so much like wonder to what we do. And it's always so nice to just get a moment to appreciate and recognize that in artificial intelligence and robotics.
As a humanities major and my master's in public administration, I think for me, it's always about asking questions, regardless of what the topic is. And most of the time, when I do pick up some of the quote unquote language, it has to do with asking something that takes me into the technical. And sometimes I need to be able to articulate something in the language in which the topic is in. And in this case, we're talking about artificial intelligence. So I think for students, sometimes, especially as a first generation student, English is my second language. So sometimes thinking about what I'm going to ask and then hearing it and processing it is really interesting to then have someone tell me very broken down that particular step by step of what it is we're talking about. I think that's important also, that we don't shy away from those things. And I love that you're really leaning in and really using that technical language. And so what if it's dry? Not everything's supposed to be exciting and new, but you learn your basics. And if you really like the basics, that's when you start putting everything together in a way that really comes together for you. So I have to ask, what does your family think about what you do? Like, I think I'm understanding what you do and how you do it. I'd like to think I am a kind of a smart person, but does your family kind of understand? And I'm assuming they support you, of course.
Yes. So my family is immensely supportive of what I do. And I always try my best. Like, that's my family. I like to think they are my reality check and sort of how I ground myself. So, I think in academia, people tend to get very comfortable using a lot of jargon and a lot of technical speak. And we understand together if you're sort of in that in-group. But I always like to think to myself, if I was sitting down with one of my grandparents or with one of my parents, if I were to explain this, would they understand? One of my favorite things about talking to my family is I always love showing my sister in particular the things I'm working on, because her reaction is inevitably always something along the lines of, wait, is that it? Was that actually impressive what you just showed me? It seems like this should be really easy. And she makes me laugh every time she does that because she really knows how to keep me humble. But I think that's such a great perspective to have. And I think it highlights that notion of embodiment earlier. Every single thing I show my family, for us as human beings, it's so simple. It should be really easy. But for a robot that has none of this previous experience, we have to build this thing from the ground up. The things I show are, it is much harder for a robot to do those things.
Right.
So I love the perspective of my family, because I really genuinely think they keep me very grounded. I like making sure that I can explain this, that they understand. But more importantly, they're always just so supportive. I absolutely would not be where I am without all of their support and encouragement.
That's awesome.
One follow-up question, Emily, and I think this might even connect to your kind of like views as an AI educator. Something you just mentioned is that your family kind of will break this down as like very easy, even though they know it's really hard, even though you know it's really hard. And one thing that I think I've become a really big proponent of over the past couple of years working at Veritas is trying to make AI feel more accessible in how I talk about it. And by that, I just simply mean like not framing AI as this like impossible to access toolkit, but something that anyone with the right amount of work and like resilience could like tackle. Would you say that a big way that you think about AI education and the way that you frame it to your family is also about bringing them in and making it feel accessible?
Absolutely. And I really love the way you just phrased it. And that's one of my favorite things of working with Veritas AI is this whole idea that we need AI to be accessible. It should not be this scary black box that no one understands. And what I always like to tell people, my family, my students, I try to instill this all the time, is that AI it's just another tool. It's just another, tool in your toolkit to make your life easier. And so the same way you would use a screwdriver or you use, a web browser to look something up, you can use AI as a tool to make your life easier in different ways. And I think that's something that I found people seem to finally sort of click, It's not this thing that just can't possibly understand. It's a tool for you to use, and it's just there to make your life a little easier in some specific way.
Well, I appreciate both you and Tyler really making it simplistic for those of us that are sometimes overwhelmed by hearing about artificial intelligence. And we do hear about the robots will take over. And, we do all of these things that are very negative. And Tyler's been really good about showing us the positives and showing us the levels and facets of how artificial intelligence is really unfolding. So I want to thank you, Emily, for being on this episode and giving us access to not only the fabulous opportunities that you've had and how they've unfolded for you, but Tyler, thank you again for just such a wonderful network of people that you know and you've brought in to really give us that perspective of something that I think is an exciting field as I learn more and more.
Yeah, no, thank you as always, Sylvia. So lovely to be here and so grateful to you, Emily, for joining us. I think you bring in such a fun perspective in AI education, AI robotics, different couple areas of how we can think about AI from a careers or working perspective. So I really appreciated you joining us today.
Thank you so much. I was genuinely so honored when I was asked to be a guest, and I just really enjoyed this. It was a lovely conversation. So thank you both so much for having me.
Thank you so much, and stay tuned for more insider career conversations that showcase career paths within artificial intelligence. We appreciate you listening and look forward to next time.
This podcast is brought to you by Juarez Consulting. Learn more at juarezconsultinginc.com or follow us on social media or YouTube at Juarez Consulting.